I still remember the sound before I understood what it was. It wasn't a scream, or even a gunshot, not right away. It was the sound of a champagne glass hitting the stone patio, shattering in the middle of my daughter's laugh. That's the sound I'll never forget. The shot came a heartbeat later. People talk about time slowing down. It doesn't slow, it just folds in on itself, trapping you between moments you can't process. 1 second, I was holding my wife's hand, watching our daughter dance with her husband under the string lights we'd hung ourselves. The next, there was chaos. A shape falling, a flash, someone yelling, "Call 911." And my own voice, somewhere deep, asking, "What just happened?" It was a wedding. It was supposed to be perfect. And it was until Karen showed up. Before that day, before that gun, our lives were small in the best kind of way. My name doesn't matter much, not in the way it used to. For 20 years, I worked behind closed doors and thick walls, the kind of work where every word could ripple through people's lives. I served as a circuit court judge for most of my career, and later I became the Chief Justice of our state's Supreme Court. It sounds impressive when you say it out loud. It never felt that way. My life at home was quiet. My wife, Ellen, was a public school art teacher who believed in saving everything our daughter ever made. Finger paintings, clay animals, all of it. Our daughter, Lily, was born when I was already buried in case law and long days. She brought color to a house that had started to fade into gray. When Lily met Ethan, she was 26 and convinced love was a kind of rebellion. She was the kind of woman who made decisions with her heart first and let the logic catch up later. Ethan was steady, an engineer, quiet, patient, the sort who listened before he spoke. The day she brought him home, I knew I'd never have to worry about her again. He looked at her like she was both a mystery and a home. When they got engaged, Ellen wanted the wedding at our lake house, the one place that had survived the years without being touched by my job or the outside world. It sat on a bend of Stillwater Lake, a small gated community where we'd bought property a decade earlier. That's where we met her, Karen. Her full name was Karen Geller, though everyone just called her the HOA president. She wasn't elected so much as she crowned herself. A retired realtor with a taste for order, she spent her days walking the neighborhood with a clipboard, pointing out trash cans left out too long, mailboxes needing repainting, lawn edges that weren't regulation neat. Ellen called her persistent. I called her predictable. Lily called her the devil's hall monitor. When we first met her, she seemed harmless, talkative, always peering past you as if she was scanning for violations. She had that tone people get when they think authority is a personality trait, the kind who says things like, "That's against code," even at a barbecue. The first time she came to our door, it was to tell us our dock was 3 inches too wide. The second time, she asked that we please refrain from leaving our kayak out overnight. By the third visit, I had learned not to answer. Ellen did, though. She always did. Ellen believed in keeping peace, even when it wasn't deserved. When Lily told her we were planning the wedding at the lake house, Karen appeared the next morning, clipboard in hand, sunglasses on, voice sharp with that rehearsed politeness that always precedes trouble. She said outdoor events were not permitted unless approved by the association. We had already cleared it, sent in the paperwork, paid the temporary use fee. She said she'd look into it. Then she started looking into everything else. Every delivery truck got photographed. Every rehearsal visit was logged. The day before the wedding, she left a printed notice taped to our door. Noise levels must comply with HOA quiet hours. Curfew, 10 p.m. Ellen took it down before Lily saw it. But I saw the way she folded it, not crumpled, not torn, just folded small enough to hide in her pocket. She said she didn't want to ruin the mood. The morning of the wedding, the air was perfect. The lake was still, the sky wide and open. Lily came down in her dress barefoot, carrying her shoes in her hand, laughing about how she'd spill something on the white fabric before she even reached the aisle. Ellen cried while pinning the last curl into her hair. I stood behind them, pretending to fix my tie just to hide the way my hands shook. I'd spent decades watching people break and rebuild in courtrooms, but nothing prepared me for watching my daughter promise her life to someone else. By noon, the guests began to arrive, a mix of family, old friends, a few colleagues from my chambers who promised to keep it low profile. Everything went right. The ceremony, the music, the vows, all of it. I remember thinking, halfway through the reception, that this was what peace must feel like. Lily and Ethan had their first dance to a song from a movie none of us had seen. Ellen leaned her head on my shoulder. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a judge or a name in the paper. I just felt like a father. When Karen showed up, I didn't notice her at first. She wasn't invited. She wasn't even dressed for a wedding. Khaki pants, a sleeveless top, a frown that looked carved in place. I saw her standing near the edge of the lawn, her phone out, taking pictures. Ellen touched my arm. "Ignore her," she whispered. And I did, or I tried to, until she started shouting. That's the moment where everything began to fracture, where normal life ended and the part of the story I wish I could forget began. She started shouting about permits. At first, no one understood who she was talking to. The band had just started another song, and half the guests were on the dance floor. Then the music faltered, the kind of uncertain pause musicians make when they're not sure if they should stop or keep going. Karen stood near the hedges, clipboard in one hand, phone raised in the other, recording. Her voice carried, sharp and deliberate. "This is an unapproved event," she said. "You're in violation of HOA regulations." It took me a second to process that she was addressing me. Ellen moved before I did. She walked over, still in her silver dress, still smiling like this was all some kind of misunderstanding that could be smoothed over with kindness. "Karen," she said, "today's Lily's wedding. You've known about it for months. Everything's cleared with the board. Karen didn't even glance at her. Noise levels are excessive. Vehicles are obstructing emergency access. This event is not compliant." Her tone wasn't angry, it was proud, like she'd been waiting for this moment, proof that she'd been right all along. I walked over then, trying to keep my voice even. "Karen, we submitted all documentation. I personally paid the permit fees. You can confirm that with—" She cut me off. "I don't take orders from residents. The HOA charter gives me authority to enforce—" "Karen," I said, lower now, "I'm not giving you an order. I'm asking you to please step away. This is my daughter's wedding." For a second, I thought she would. Her mouth twitched like she might back down. But instead, she raised her phone higher. "I'll be filing a formal complaint. You'll hear from our legal counsel." Behind me, I could hear murmurs, people whispering, someone laughing awkwardly. Lily's friend whispered, "Is this for real?" And someone else said, "Only in America." Ellen reached for Karen's arm gently. "Please, just—" Karen jerked away like she'd been burned. "Don't touch me!" The shout turned every head. Even the children went quiet. That's when Lily appeared, still in her gown, barefoot, eyes bright from dancing. "What's going on?" she asked, voice light, unaware. "Mom? Dad?" Karen turned on her like she was the problem itself. "You're trespassing on common property." "This entire event is subject to HOA enforcement," Lily blinked. "We live here," she said softly. Karen stepped closer. "Not for long if you keep disrespecting community standards." There was something in the way she said it, that smug, righteous tone that doesn't hear itself, that made my chest tighten. I stepped between them. "That's enough," I said. Karen smiled, a strange, small smile that didn't match her eyes. You think you're above the rules because of who you are. I didn't answer. She already knew. Everyone in the neighborhood knew what I did for a living. She said, "You can't hide behind your title here. This is my community." Then she walked off toward her house, muttering something about calling the sheriff. We tried to forget it. The music started again. Ellen told the band to play something soft. The guests returned to their tables, though the laughter never quite returned to full volume. Lily brushed it off the way she did everything, with grace she must have learned from her mother. "Let her be," she said. "She just needs to feel important." But Ellen's hand shook as she poured herself a glass of wine. "She won't stop," she said quietly to me. "You know she won't." She was right. About half an hour later, 2 sheriff's deputies arrived. They were polite, embarrassed even. One of them, Officer Daniels, had been in my courtroom years earlier for a procedural matter. He nodded to me, eyes apologetic. "Judge, we got a call about a noise complaint." I gestured toward the guests. "You tell me if this qualifies as a disturbance." He shook his head. "Looks fine to me, sir." "We'll mark it," resolved. But Karen wasn't done. She came back down the road, phone still recording, yelling about preferential treatment and abuse of authority. The deputies tried to calm her, but she kept raising her voice. "He's intimidating me. He's threatening me." I hadn't said a word. Lily went up to her then, my brave, foolish girl. She said, "Please stop. It's my wedding. Please." Her voice broke just a little on the last word. That should have been enough for any reasonable person. But reason had long since left Karen. "She's trespassing," Karen shouted. Ellen said, "She's my daughter." And I said nothing. I was watching the deputies, their unease growing by the second, unsure whether to intervene or just walk away. Karen finally turned back toward her house, hurling threats over her shoulder about legal action and removing us from the HOA entirely. When she disappeared through her gate, I thought it was over. The rest of the evening felt like trying to restart a song after the record had cracked. We kept smiling, kept clapping, kept pretending everything was still right. The lights over the patio glowed warm and steady. People danced again. Lily and Ethan cut the cake, laughing when the frosting smeared across her cheek. For a while, it almost worked. Then the lights flickered. Ellen thought it was a fuse. I knew better. The HOA controlled the shared power lines. I saw her shadow first, at the edge of the property by the fence. A flashlight beam cut through the dark, aimed at our sound equipment. I walked toward it, trying to keep my voice calm. "Karen, go home." She didn't move. "You're still playing music after curfew?" "It's 9:43, I said. "Curfew's 9:30 for events," she replied. "Board approved." "It was approved until 10, I said. She lifted something from her side. At first I thought it was the flashlight again, but it was heavier, darker. A gun. My breath caught. I heard Ellen's voice behind me. "What are you doing?" And then Lily's voice closer. "Dad?" That's when Karen raised her arm. The rest of that moment fractures in my memory like glass. Sound without sequence, images without order, the flash, the scream, the champagne glass breaking on the patio, and Lily falling. I don't remember running. I don't remember yelling for help. I only remember the weight of her in my arms, the warmth leaving her skin, Ellen's sobs somewhere above me, and Karen's voice still shouting about rules and trespassing as if any of that mattered anymore. That was the moment everything changed, the second my world divided into before and after. I've replayed that night in my head thousands of times, and every version ends the same way, Lily's hand slipping out of mine before the ambulance doors close. The rest of it, though, the noise, the shouting, the blur of sirens, it all comes back in pieces. She hit the ground before I even processed what had happened. There wasn't a dramatic fall. Just her knees giving out, her body folding like a marionette with its strings cut. I caught her before her head struck the stones. Her eyes were open, wide, shocked, but unfocused, like she was trying to recognize me and couldn't. Ellen screamed. Someone yelled for help. I pressed my hand against the wound before I even saw it, a small red bloom spreading through the fabric of her dress, just below her ribs. My palm came away wet. I remember thinking, this isn't real. This can't be real. Karen still stood by the fence, gun lowered now, her face blank, not horrified, not panicked, just blank. Like she didn't understand the math of what she'd done. The deputies, the same ones who'd come for the noise complaint, were already sprinting. One of them tackled her to the ground. The other grabbed the gun, shouting commands she didn't even seem to hear. She kept saying, "It was an accident." She rushed me. I was scared over and over, the same words, mechanical and empty. I couldn't look at her. All I could see was the blood seeping through my daughter's wedding gown, that impossible red on white. Ellen was kneeling beside me, clutching Lily's other hand, whispering, "Stay with us, sweetheart. Please stay with us." Her voice was calm in a way only shock can make you calm. Someone called 911 again. I heard sirens not long after, too fast and too slow all at once. The paramedics arrived, took over, voices clipped and efficient. One of them pressed gauze, another checked her pulse. They lifted her onto a stretcher and I followed, numb, my hands still stained. When the doors shut, I caught a glimpse of Karen sitting on the curb, handcuffed, her face pale. She looked small then, not righteous, not powerful, just small. The hospital was 40 minutes away, but it felt like a lifetime. Ellen sat beside me in silence, her hands clenched around the hem of her dress. My tie was gone, my shirt open at the collar, my mind split between memories and prayers. I kept thinking of the morning, her laughing, barefoot, holding her shoes, and how that same laugh still hung in the air when the glass shattered. When we arrived, they rushed her into surgery. "Stay in the waiting area," someone said. So we did. The room was too bright, the clock too loud. The smell of disinfectant clung to everything. Ellen didn't cry. She just stared at the floor, repeating Lily's name under her breath like it was the only word left in her vocabulary. I sat beside her, elbows on my knees, blood drying under my nails. I could still feel the warmth of it. There are things you can wash off and things you can't. Time stopped meaning anything. At some point, Ethan arrived, still in his suit, tie loosened, face ashen. He must have driven behind the ambulance without realizing how fast. He looked at us, then at the double doors she'd disappeared through. "Is she?" I shook my head. He sank into a chair, hands covering his face. Hours passed. Doctors came and went, speaking in that language of probabilities that never says what you need to hear. We're doing everything we can. She's lost a lot of blood. It's critical. Every sentence ended without an answer. When the surgeon finally came out, his scrubs were stained dark. He didn't need to say anything. Ellen made a sound I didn't recognize, something between a gasp and a wail. I stood up because I couldn't stay sitting. The doctor said words I barely heard. Internal bleeding, no pulse, too much damage. And just like that, our daughter, our only child, was gone. They took us to see her. She looked peaceful. They always say that. But peace has no place in a room like that. Her skin was cold, her hair still pinned, a faint trace of the perfume Ellen had given her that morning. I brushed a strand from her cheek and realized I'd never see her eyes again. Never hear her laugh echo across the water. Ellen kept whispering. She was happy. She was so happy, as if that could make it less unbearable. The police came later that night. They wanted statements. They were careful with me. Too careful. The young detective kept calling me sir and glancing nervously at his notepad. I could feel it in the air, the awareness of who I was, the weight of my title. Chief Justice, the man who swore to uphold the law, now sitting in a blood-stained shirt demanding justice of his own. She said it was self-defense, the detective told me, almost apologetic. I stared at him. She shot an unarmed woman on her wedding day. She's claiming she felt threatened. That your daughter lunged at her. Ellen's voice broke through, sharp and clear. She was begging her to leave. He nodded quickly, writing it down, but his eyes said what his words didn't. This case would be messy. They released Karen the next morning. Released. They said they couldn't hold her without charge until the DA reviewed the evidence. She had no prior record, she was cooperative, and, their words, it may have been accidental. Accidental. That word became a knife. Every time I heard it, it cut a little deeper. Ellen refused to go home. We stayed in a hotel near the courthouse. The house by the lake, the scene of it, had become something else. A place haunted not by ghosts, but by the weight of what still lingered there. The community was silent. Neighbors who once waved from driveways now crossed the street when they saw me. Emails went unanswered. Even the HOA board, the same people who'd once boasted about my residency in newsletters, went quiet. Karen had allies, it turned out. People who called her overzealous but fair. People who said no one really knows what happened. The sheriff's office called it an ongoing investigation. Weeks passed, then months. I'd spent my entire career believing in process. That truth, when examined properly, would always prevail. But sitting in that sterile courtroom months later, watching Karen walk in wearing a neat blue blazer and tears she'd practiced in the mirror, I realized how naive that faith was. Her attorney spun a story of a woman harassed by powerful neighbors, frightened for her safety, provoked into tragedy. They played audio from her phone, selective clips of me telling her to leave, of guests shouting. They painted her as fragile, misunderstood, and me as intimidating. The defense requested bail. It was granted. When she walked past me, she didn't look at my wife or Ethan. She looked at me, straight, deliberate, almost defiant. In that moment, something in me hardened. I had spent decades keeping my emotions out of the courtroom, believing neutrality was justice. But watching the woman who killed my daughter walk free on bond pending trial, I understood something I'd never allowed myself to admit. The law isn't always justice. Sometimes it's just the illusion of it. Ellen stopped speaking for a while after that. She'd move through days mechanically. Shower, sit, stare, sleep. Ethan tried to visit often, but grief isolates. It makes islands out of people who once shared the same shore. As for me, I kept working. I presided over hearings, signed orders, smiled through ceremonies. But every night when I came home to that empty silence, I thought about Karen's face. I thought about Lily's blood on my hands, and I thought about how fragile the line is between duty and rage. That line would be tested sooner than I ever imagined. Grief doesn't explode. It seeps. It finds its way into the cracks of ordinary life until everything tastes like it. The morning after the hearing, I went to work. Not because I wanted to, but because the idea of sitting in that hotel room, surrounded by Lily's photos and Ellen's silence, felt worse. I sat behind the same mahogany desk I'd sat behind for years, the state seal hanging behind me, the flag at my shoulder, and for the first time in my life I hated this room. Every case that came before me felt absurd. Minor disputes, procedural motions, civil appeals that no longer seemed to matter. I signed orders without reading them twice. The clerks whispered when they thought I couldn't hear. The newspaper headlines didn't help. HOA President claims self-defense in wedding shooting. Chief Justice's daughter fatally shot amid neighborhood dispute. That title, Chief Justice, suddenly felt like a cage. Everything I said, everything I did was weighed for impropriety. I couldn't speak publicly, couldn't show emotion, couldn't even call the prosecutor's office without it being labeled interference. Ellen asked me one night, "What's the point of being the law if it can't protect our daughter?" I didn't have an answer. The investigation dragged. The DA's office treated it like a live grenade. No one wanted to touch it wrong. They had to be thorough, they said, impartial. Meanwhile, Karen went back home. Neighbors said she'd been seen walking her dog, trimming her hedges, acting like nothing happened. The HOA meetings resumed under her temporary suspension. She even had supporters posting online about her courage under attack. I stopped reading the comments after the third night. People will find a way to blame the dead if it means defending their version of order. When the grand jury convened, I wasn't allowed to attend. Conflict of interest. I waited outside the courthouse, hands clenched, staring at the same steps I'd walked 1,000 times before. Ellen didn't come. She said she couldn't watch them decide if her daughter's life even counted as a crime. When the decision came down, I thought I'd misheard the words. No true bill. No indictment. They called it lack of sufficient evidence. The defense had painted her as fearful. A lone woman confronted by a group, one of them shouting, another approaching. A tragic misunderstanding. That's what the DA called it in the press conference. Tragic misunderstanding. That phrase echoed through me like rot. That night, Ellen took her ring off. We were sitting at the kitchen table of the lake house, the first time we'd been back since the shooting. The bloodstains were gone, the patio resurfaced, but I could still see it all. I could still hear it. She placed the ring down on the table. "I can't live here," she said. Her voice was flat. Not angry, not broken, just done. "Where will you go?" "My sister's," she said. "Just for a while." I wanted to stop her, to tell her I needed her, but the truth was I didn't know how to reach her anymore. We'd built our marriage on reason, two steady people building a steady life. But grief doesn't honor steadiness. It devours it. When she left, she didn't hug me. She just nodded. The door closed, and the house was quiet again. I stayed behind. For weeks. Every morning, I walked the perimeter of the property, the same path Lily and I used to take when she was a child. I'd count the steps between the birch trees and the lake, the way she used to. 47 from the porch to the dock. 17 from the dock to the water line when it was low. One morning, I found an envelope in the mailbox. No return address. Inside was a printed letter, typed, unsigned. Maybe if your family followed the rules, none of this would have happened. There was no name, but I knew who wrote it. I sat on the porch holding that letter, staring across the water at Karen's house. The curtains were open. I could see her moving inside, her life continuing as if nothing had been taken from her. Something inside me, the last piece of patience, maybe, gave way. The next day, I took a leave of absence. Health reasons. That's what the official record says. No one questioned it. The headlines had already moved on to newer tragedies. I started going through case files at home, old precedents, obscure statutes. I told myself it was curiosity, but it was something darker, searching for a way to make the law bend towards something that felt like justice again. It wasn't revenge I wanted, not at first. It was recognition, acknowledgement that what she did was wrong, that Lily mattered. But recognition never came. Instead, Karen filed a civil complaint against us. She claimed defamation, emotional distress, and community harassment. She wanted damages from us. The summons arrived on a Thursday afternoon. I stared at it so long the paper blurred. Ellen's name, my name, defendants. I laughed then, a sound that didn't feel like mine. It was hollow, brittle. That night, I drove past her house. The porch light was on. Her flag fluttered in the breeze, the same flag she used to scold people for letting fade. There was a wind chime, soft and tinkling. She looked out the window once. Our eyes met. She didn't flinch. She just drew the curtain. The trial for her lawsuit began the following spring. By then, Ellen was living elsewhere full-time. We spoke rarely, mostly about legal logistics or estate matters. She was gentler than I deserved, but distant, the kind of distance you can't cross with words anymore. Karen arrived in court wearing a neck brace, claiming residual trauma from the altercation. Her lawyer painted her as the true victim, a lonely widow targeted by an influential man's grief. When I took the stand, the opposing counsel asked if I believed my professional position entitled me to special treatment. I said no. He smiled, satisfied. Then he asked if I'd ever lost my temper with Karen before the shooting. I said no, again. He played a clip, audio from her phone, of me saying, "Karen, go home before you regret this." The jury murmured. I could feel my career, my entire reputation, hanging in that moment. I tried to explain context, that I'd meant regret as in embarrassment, not threat. But it didn't matter. The soundbite was enough. The judge declared a mistrial after a witness made a prejudicial statement, but by then the damage was done. The papers ran the story for weeks. Chief Justice threatened HOA president before fatal shooting. I resigned quietly 3 months later. Officially, it was to prioritize family and personal well-being. Unofficially, I was tired of pretending that law and morality still shared a border. After my resignation, I stopped being Your Honor. I became just another man people avoided at the grocery store, another headline fading from memory. But I didn't stop watching. Karen still lived across the lake. Every morning, she'd walk her dog past the site of the wedding, past the flowers that kept growing there no matter how many times the groundskeepers mowed them down. I never planted them. They just kept coming back, small white lilies. Sometimes she'd pause to look at them. Sometimes she'd scowl. I started keeping a journal, not of legal notes, but of observations. Dates, times, patterns. I told myself it was for closure, that I needed to understand how someone could go on living after doing something like that. But deep down, I think I was waiting. For what, I wasn't sure. Until one evening, she knocked on my door. She looked older than I remembered, thinner, her hair shorter. She held something in her hand. An envelope. "I need you to sign this," she said. "It's about the property line. HOA revision." Her tone was brisk, as if none of it, the blood, the trial, the headlines, had ever happened. I stood there for a long time, silent. She shifted, impatient. "I don't have all day." That's when I noticed it, her hand trembling, her eyes flickering, a faint edge of fear she tried to hide. For the first time, I saw it. She wasn't fearless. She was hollow. I signed the paper. When I handed it back, our fingers almost touched. She flinched, just slightly, and stepped back. "Thank you," she said quickly, and left. I watched her walk down the path, her shoulders stiff, and realized the strangest thing. I didn't hate her anymore. Not because she deserved forgiveness, but because hate was just another way of keeping her alive inside me. And I was so tired of her living there. Grief is quieter than I imagined it would be. It doesn't scream or weep forever. It just lingers, like humidity after a storm, clinging to the walls, the skin, the air. Months passed in that half-light. The newspapers had long moved on. The trial, the coverage, the interviews, all of it became archived tragedy. But for me and Ellen, time moved like a slow tide, pulling us in and out of memories we couldn't escape. I went back to work gradually. The advisory role turned permanent. I was asked to lecture at law schools, to speak about ethics, about how bias can seep into judgment. I used to begin those lectures by quoting the Constitution. Now, I started with silence. I'd let it sit for 10, sometimes 15 seconds. You could feel the students shift in their chairs. Then I'd say, "Justice isn't about balance. It's about endurance." The words always came heavy, but they were honest. I was tired of pretending that justice fixed things. It only acknowledged them. And sometimes acknowledgement was the most a human being could give. Ellen and I tried therapy. She went first. I followed later. We sat in a small office that smelled faintly of coffee and old books. The therapist, a woman with kind eyes, asked us to describe Lily in one word. "Fearless," Ellen said. "Kind," I said. We both smiled at that. Different words, same truth. The therapist asked what forgiveness meant to us. I told her it wasn't something I was looking for anymore. Forgiveness sounded final, and nothing about Lily's death felt finished. What I wanted was permission. Permission to live a day without feeling guilty for still being here. She said that was forgiveness in disguise. Sometimes at night I'd drive by the lake. The "for sale" sign on Karen's house was gone. A young family had moved in. You could see bicycles by the porch, chalk drawings on the driveway. The sound of children playing used to hurt, but then, after a while, it didn't. I never told Ellen when I drove there. It was my private pilgrimage. I'd park by the curve, roll down the window, and let the wind off the water carry the faint smell of pine and algae. The smell of the morning my daughter should have said, "I do." One evening, as I sat there, the new owner waved from his porch. A man about my age, beard flecked with gray. I nodded back. He didn't know who I was or what had happened here. Maybe that was the best thing. For him, this was just a lake. For me, it was a place that had finally stopped bleeding. A year after Lily's death, Ethan visited. He looked thinner, quieter, but steadier somehow. He brought a folder with him, legal documents. He'd started a foundation in Lily's name, the Lily Grant Fund for Responsible Gun Ownership. He asked if I'd sit on the advisory board. I hesitated. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. The man who'd spent decades interpreting the law now helping write policy around it. But I said yes. At the first meeting, I sat across from activists, lawyers, and parents who had lost children in similar ways. No cameras, no headlines, just stories. Each one like a shard of the same broken mirror. Listening to them, I realized how small our own tragedy was in the ocean of others. It didn't make mine hurt less, it just made it human. That was the first time I felt purpose again. The second anniversary came quietly. No ceremony, no service. Ellen and I spent the day cooking Lily's favorite meal, roasted salmon with dill, asparagus, and lemon pie. We set 2 plates, then 3. The third stayed empty. After dinner, Ellen put on Lily's playlist. Old songs, the kind she used to dance to while cleaning her dorm room. We didn't talk. We just listened. And when the final track played, a soft acoustic cover of "Here Comes the Sun," we both cried. Not like before, not from rage or helplessness, just release. A few weeks later, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a short note written in careful, uneven script. I sold the house. I've moved to live with my sister in Oregon. I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope you find peace. You deserve it. Karen. There was no signature, just that one line. For a moment, I thought about writing back. Then I folded the letter, placed it inside the box with Lily's things, and closed it gently. Some conversations don't need replies. Ellen and I began to travel again. Short trips at first. The coast, the mountains, small towns where no one recognized me. We'd walk through old bookstores and antique shops, buying nothing, just touching the spines of books, the edges of furniture, like tourists in our own lives. Once, while watching the sunset over the Pacific, Ellen said, "Do you ever think she'd be proud of us?" I thought about that for a long time. "I think she'd tell us to stop being so serious," I said finally. Ellen smiled. "That sounds like her." As the years rolled forward, the grief changed shape again. It became quieter, like an old scar you forget about until weather shifts. When I finally returned to the bench, this time as an emeritus judge sitting on appeals, I found myself gentler with defendants. I used to think justice was about order. Now I understood it was about mercy disguised as consequence. One afternoon, after a long hearing, a young lawyer asked me privately, "How do you stay calm when everything feels wrong?" I told him, "Because sometimes the best thing you can do for the world is refuse to let it turn you cruel." He wrote that down. I hope he remembers it when it matters. We kept Lily's lake house. Not as a home, but as a retreat. Every spring, Ellen and I go back to clear the path to the water. The lilies always return, even when the winter has been harsh. I've come to see them as a kind of promise, that some beauty insists on coming back, no matter what was lost before. I still see the mark on the fence where the bullet hit after passing through her. Weather has softened it, but not erased it. I don't want it erased. Some truths should remain visible, not to haunt, but to remind. That's what grief becomes, I think, not a wound, but a landmark. On the 3rd anniversary, I went to the dock alone and threw the last of Lily's bouquet petals into the lake. They spread wide, floating until they disappeared into the reflection of the clouds. I whispered, "We're okay, sweetheart. You can rest." The wind rose softly, brushing the water, and for just a second it felt like she was there. Not in ghost or voice, but in the calm. I stayed until dusk, the air cool on my skin, the lilies faint in the fading light. I thought about everything that had happened, the noise, the silence, the hate, the quiet after. I thought about justice, too, the kind people ask for and the kind they never see, and I realized I'd been wrong all along. Justice isn't something you deliver, it's something you learn to live inside. That was the aftermath. Not healing, exactly, just living, finally, without holding my breath. And for me, that was enough. The hardest thing about grief isn't the loss itself. It's learning to live in a world that kept going without asking your permission. For a long time, I resented that. I thought the world should have paused, just a day, an hour, to acknowledge what had been taken. But it didn't. The mail still came. The seasons still changed. Strangers still smiled at me in grocery aisles, unaware that they were talking to a man who had watched his daughter die in a white dress. I used to think that was cruelty. Now I think it's mercy. The world moves because it must. And eventually, so did I. I sometimes return to that courthouse where I once worked, just to walk the halls. The marble floors are polished the same way. The smell of paper and dust still clings to the air. I nod to the bailiffs, the clerks. Some of them know who I am. Others just see an old man moving slowly, as though retracing something he left behind. In one of the smaller courtrooms, the one with the heavy oak doors, I sat alone one afternoon and listened to the echoes of old cases in my head. Arguments, verdicts, the sound of the gavel. I realized I'd spent most of my life believing that truth came from order, that if you built the right structure, laws, rules, systems, you could keep the chaos out. But chaos doesn't stay outside. It lives in us. It was in Karen's fear, in Lily's laughter, in my silence afterward, and it's only when we stop pretending to be untouched by it that we start to understand one another. A journalist once asked me, in a quiet interview for a retrospective piece, if I ever regretted not using my power to make an example out of Karen. I told him no. Then I said something that surprised even me. Justice is about boundaries, I said. And sometimes mercy is the last boundary we have left before becoming what we hate. He didn't print that quote. Maybe it wasn't dramatic enough, but it's the only truth I know for sure. Years later, when I was asked to give a keynote speech to new judges, I almost declined. But Ellen said, "You owe them the truth." So I went. I stood on the stage looking out at all those fresh faces, people who still believed the law was armor, not burden. I told them about mistakes, about moral fatigue, about the weight of sitting in judgment. Then I paused and said, "Every verdict you give will change a life. Sometimes more than one. You will never be entirely right or entirely wrong, only human. And if you forget that, you will fail both justice and mercy." When I finished, the room was silent. No applause. Just a stillness that felt like understanding. That was enough. Ellen and I are older now. We still keep a framed picture of Lily on the mantel, her laughing, one hand holding her veil down against the wind. Some nights, when the light hits it just right, it looks like she's still moving, caught in a moment that refuses to fade. We've learned to talk about her without breaking apart. We visit the lake every spring. We don't bring flowers anymore. We don't need to. The lilies return on their own, uninvited, unforced. They always do. Ellen once asked me, "Do you think you'll ever retire for good?" I said, "Maybe. But as long as I can still listen, I should keep listening." She smiled. "That's who you've always been." Even before all this, I think she's right. Listening, to the silence, to the pain, to what remains unsaid, that's the only way any of us stay connected to what's human in us. Last month, I received a letter from Ethan. He's remarried now. They had a daughter. He named her Lily. He wrote, "I hope she grows up with your steadiness. I hope I grow into your patience." I cried when I read it. Not the shaking kind, just quiet tears that came like rain on a window. I thought about how life had folded back on itself, how something new had come from what was broken. That's when I finally understood what Lily meant in her letter. Love isn't a verdict, it's a choice. It's the hardest choice I've ever made, to keep loving this world after what it took from me. But it's the only one that ever mattered. Sometimes I still walk the dock at the lake at dusk. The water catches the last light, and for a moment everything feels suspended. The air, the ripples, the grief. If I listen closely, I can almost hear her laugh. Not haunting, not distant, just familiar. Like she's close enough to touch, but knows I don't need proof anymore. I stand there until the sky darkens, until the first stars blink through the clouds. I don't pray, I don't bargain. I just say thank you. To the water, to the lilies, to the silence. I think about Karen sometimes. I wonder if she found peace in Oregon. I don't hate her. I don't forgive her either. I just understand her. Fear does terrible things to people, so does pride. If she ever reads this, I hope she knows that I don't carry her name like a wound anymore. Just as a fact, part of the same story that taught me mercy's shape. It's strange, being both the victim and the judge of your own story. I've learned that justice isn't blind. It sees everything, but chooses to respond with restraint. And maybe that's what saves us in the end. Not power, not vengeance. Just the courage to stay kind when the world teaches you otherwise. Every spring, when the lilies bloom, I bring one home and place it in a small glass by the window. I watch it open in the morning light. It always faces the sun, no matter where I put it. I think of Lily then, her name, her laughter, the life she never got to finish. And I whisper the same thing every time, as if she can still hear me. Justice served, my love. But mercy kept. And when the light hits the water just right, I swear I can almost see her there, not waiting to be avenged, just reminding me that love was always the greater law.